this video, I'm going to be walking you through exactly how you can set up an automation using make.com or another low-code automation platform in order to automate newsletter content. And so this was the very first flow in make.com that I built using no other blueprints or using no other YouTube tutorials. And so this is all something that I've built just from trial and error and spending a lot of time and effort and energy trying a bunch of different things and really just going through a frustrating process of trying a million different things, or so it seemed, until I finally got it to output content in the way that I would like it to. And so I'm going to make a video that runs through the entire automation. I'm going to show you exactly how you could set up something similar, how to set up the GPT modules, and basically just walking through the logic in order to get content formatted in the way that you want it, just by using an automation so that you can save time. Yeah, so let's jump right into it. So this is the newsletter itself. Now, this is my newsletter. It doesn't have like a big audience by any means. It's something I built a while back. And at this point, I'm really just using it, or I have been using it, as a means to like create a personal use case for my automations. And so the format of this newsletter. So we have an in today's edition, and then it's just summarizing like the main, most trendy news bits, I guess, that are going to be mentioned throughout the newsletter. And then there's three key sections. So there's economics edge, tech trends, and then news bites. And there previously I was doing this deep dive of the day, but in this automation I didn't include that. It's just going to be a little bit leaner. And so finally, then there's a too long didn't read section, which is essentially just a one sentence summary of every news story curated throughout this entire newsletter. And as you can see, each section or each main section will have generally like 3 to 5 main news links that we're curating for that section, and it hyperlinks to that actual article, so people can read further into it if they would like. And a big challenge for me was getting it to output, getting the make automation to output in that same exact format, so that it actually hyperlinks to the title that you can click into, just like I showed you there. So this was an example before I automated anything, and I think I managed to get pretty close, if not just as good, in terms of using this flow and make. And so let's just get right into it. So it starts with a Google Sheet. And it really starts with a Google form that's tied to this Google Sheet. So let's start here. So in my Google Drive, I have a Google form, and that looks like this. And basically, this is where you just insert the links that you want to be mentioned or curated within the newsletter. And in this specific example, for the sake of this video, I'm doing 2 links for each section of the newsletter. Normally there'd be like 3 to 5 links, and they'd be from all different sources. But again, for the purpose of just the most simple way of showcasing this process, I did 2 links for each section, and they're both from the same publication. So I have 2 Vox links. I have 2, what is this? TechCrunch, 2 TechCrunch links, and then 2 BBC.com links. Again, normally they'd be like 3 to 5 links. All of them would be from different sources based on what's trending in like each niche or respective section. But again, just for the simplicity of this video, I'm doing 2 links per section where they're both from the same publication, just so it's easy to reference. And so let's actually submit this form, and we'll actually see the sheet that it's linked to be populated with this data. So this is basically the sheet where it's like I said, this sheet is the central source of truth that acts as like a data hub for all the articles that have been curated for this newsletter. And so I'll go ahead and just submit this. So 2 links for each section, and as you can see, it pops up with today's timestamp, and there's 2 links for each section. And it's important to be cognizant of how you're separating the section links in the Google Sheet, because what we're going to need to do in the flow is iterate through each section's links individually. So we have 3 paths, 1 path for each main section of the newsletter. So remember, we had an economics section, and that's this path. And then we're using a text. Then we have a tech links path for the tech trends section, And then finally, we have this third path, which is for the news bytes. And then at the very end of this path, we're actually aggregating all the output that we generated in this last path, and then we'll aggregate everything at the end. So first things first, there's a Google Sheets module as the trigger. So this is what starts the flow off, and basically I'm just putting in the spreadsheet ID. So that intake sheet that's acting as the central source of truth, this is the ID of the sheet that's being connected to this make trigger. Next, I'm setting multiple variables. So remember earlier when I talked about how both of or all the links are separated by a comma and then a space, and so that acts as like the separation between each link for each section, and that's what we're doing. That's why we're using this, and so that's why I'm using this formula here because it's saying split that section's output by the comma and then a space. And so whenever there's a comma and a space, it'll separate those links so that we can iterate through each link individually. And that basically just tells our iterator what it should iterate through. And I think before I explain any of the flow, I'm just going to go ahead and run it based on the data that we just took into that Google Sheet. And then once we have outputs for each and every module, I'll run through and show you exactly what it's outputting and why I set up that module in that way in order to get that output. So let's go ahead and run it. Okay, so the automation just completed running. It took about 2.5 minutes to go from start to finish. And before I walk through the entire flow, I guess I'll just show you the actual output so you can see what it's actually generating. So let's go ahead and paste that web view link in here, and this is what it looks like. So I'm using a Google Doc to output the content. You can just copy and paste it into Beehive or MailChimp or whatever newsletter platform that you're using. But like I said, in my case, I'm just trying to create the most minimum viable product using free tools. That's not to say that there's not plenty of free newsletter tools, but that way it gives you a bit of a buffer to read through it, make any changes right from the Google Doc, and this eliminates or greatly mitigates a huge percentage of the time involved with sourcing content and then summarizing and aggregating it. So here's what it looks like. So it follows the same exact format where we have these bullet points. There's the headline that it's linked to the actual news story itself. It's got, let's go ahead and read one of them. Misfit market buys the rounds to turn your trash into treasure. So that's like the headline, and I'm having it generate a headline followed by a quick sentence or two summary to summarize the content we're aggregating. So, in an audacious move to corner both the ugly produce and ugly packaging markets, Misfit Markets has gobbled up the rounds, offering perks like $30 credit and a Misfits Plus membership to make sure that you never run out of misshapen carrots or biodegradable toilet paper. And the way that I'm able to get it to output content in the same type of tonality that I had been writing it in is because I'm using a lot of exemplars in the prompts for GPT. And we'll get to that. So as you can see, it does a pretty good job formatting it in the same way with the hyperlinks, following the same tonality. And so at this point, let's just run through the flow itself. And my goal for running through this is to give you an idea of exactly how you could do something similar for yourself. All right, so the Google Sheets as the trigger. So just connecting that sheet, that's the single source of truth where all that data is coming in, and then we're setting multiple variables. And so the set multiple variables module, this is basically when we're basically mapping the variables, the data that just came into that Google Sheet. We're making them formatted in a way that's usable across other modules from the flow. Could we map them just directly from here? Yes, we could, but remember we're iterating through each link individually, and when we're giving each section multiple links, we're not able to iterate, two links at a time if we're just mapping it straight from the Google Sheet. So that's why we're using these functions and set multiple variables to split the links by a comma and a space, and that way they look like this. So you have basically a collection of various arrays. So we have three sections, so we have three arrays in this case. Economics links, we have the first one, and this is going to be mappable individually. The second one will be mappable individually, and same with the other subsequent sections. Next, we have a router. So, like I said, we have three different paths where we're iterating through all the links for every individual section. To do that, we need to route to three different paths. So the first route is to the economics edge section. The second is to the tech trends section. So we're generating content for the tech trends section. And then the third and final path that's being routed is for the news bites. And so starting with the very first route or path for economics edge section, we have this iterator. And so we're mapping the economics links. We're taking the output from the set multiple variables array specifically for the economics, and then we're going to iterate through both of these links. And again, if we had, 5 links instead of 2, it would iterate through all 5. And that's why it iterates it into a collection, and then any subsequent module, until you aggregate them back, it'll consume 2 operations in your make.com account, or in the make.com flow, rather. And that's because anytime you iterate through an array, it consumes one operation for every array that you iterate through. So what does it actually look like when we iterate through 2 links? Well, you see this 1 here, you'd think, why is it not a 2? Why is it only a 2 in the subsequent ones? It's because in the iterator, it'll output a collection. Next, I'm using this firecrawl module for scrape a website. This is a module that you can access within Make by default. All you have to do is just set up an API key, and you just connect that API key, you just copy it here, and then you connect it within the module. So you just hit add connection, and then you'll just add the API key here, and you'll create a connection so that you can send data and communicate between Make and Firecrawl. And you don't have to use Firecrawl. There's other free tools. I don't pay for this, by the way. This is just one of the first free tools that I came across. You could also use like Appify. That's another free scraping tool. There's a number of others, so I'm just using a free scraping tool in order to basically scrape the content from each of these links that we're iterating through. And that's why it's consuming 2 operations, because we have 2 links for each section. If we had 4 links for each section and we were iterating through all 4 links, then it would scrape all 4 links, and it would pre-process all 4 links, and it wouldn't turn back to 1 until we aggregate them all back using an aggregate module. But I digress. So Firecrawl, like I said, it's a free scraping tool, and I'm just getting a long string of markdown. Um, so I'll show you what that looks like. So long string markdown. So when I'm scraping for example, a URL like this, when you scrape this, you get a bunch of text, and you get more text than what you see on this screen. There's a lot of like back-end filler and spacing characters, and a lot of code that's not visible on the actual article itself. But when you scrape it, it shows up, and you'll have like 3,000 characters sometimes. And so as you can see, it's this huge string of markdown, and like see more, and there's like related articles or most popular content. So it's like sign up. By submitting your email, you agree to our terms and conditions, advertiser content, sponsor logo. Like there's just so much of this nonsense text that's completely unrelated to the article that we're trying to scrape. And so that's why I'm using this pre-process main text. Now, is this the best way to do it? I don't know. From what I understand, it's the simplest way to do it. So as I said, there's all this like nonsense text that's unrelated to the main article, and that is why I'm using this preprocessor before we're generating any content. And so basically, the first ChatGPT module is using a mini model. So the large language model consumes less tokens when you use it. And basically, we're just using this module to filter out all the nonsense text that we're scraping and only grab the relevant text that's specifically related to our article. And then we use a second GPT module later on to actually write the content, only taking in as input the main content article. And the reason why I have 2 instead of just plugging all that content into one, like you might think, well, so what if there's a bunch of nonsense like, spacing text and read more and subscribe text? Like, why can't we just specify that to our to one GPT module? And when I was originally building this, I did try that. And what I found was when there was like 3,000 characters in a scrape output, sometimes I would run into rate limit or token issues with GPT. And I'm using the 4.0 model here, which consumes more tokens, but it's a lot smarter. And so when we're writing the content itself, we want the best model, but we don't want it to have to take in a bunch of input that's just consuming operations for no reason. And so that's why I use a smaller, less resource intensive or operationally less intensive model to pre-process that text, because it's a very simple task that I'm giving it. I'm basically just saying, hey, your task is to take as input, scrape text from an article URL, and return only the main content along with its respective URL. Remove all boilerplates, ads, menu, cookie notices, newsletter prompts, basically all that stuff that's nonsense text. We're saying, hey, remove it. I'm saying output the main content from each article with start and end references using this exact delimiter. So as you can see, I'm using this delimiter where I have 3 hyphens and then start article and then end article. And the reason that we're using this delimiter right here is because, remember, we have two links for each section. And so we want to be able to tell this subsequent GPT module, hey, here's the first link and here's where it ends. And now here's the second story, here's where it starts, and here's where that ends. As opposed to, just making it guess, like, hey, here's like a bunch of text and maybe it's one story, maybe it's 5, like figure it out. No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to leave room for guessing. We want it to be consistent and efficient, right? So that's why we're giving it that delimiter so it knows exactly where each article starts and ends. And then I also have in the prompt, if there are multiple stories on one URL page, only grab the one story associated with that URL. And so that's like I added that because sometimes there would be like, they would list like, related stories and it would still populate under the main story. And so this just weeds those, it just kind of just filters those out. Constraints, only one story per URL, skip intros, outros, newsletter signups, tangents, and anything after keep reading. And so this entire prompt just gives the preprocessor GPT module everything it needs to know in order to only grab the main content that we want, and none of that other nonsense that's going to consume operations on our best GPT module, make it take more time and run into token issues. We just don't want any of that. So. And then this is an important aspect of prompt engineering. I'm adding another user prompt. To basically give it examples. So I'm saying, hey, ChatGPT, if this is what you take as input, all this like nonsense, there's like a story, but then there's like a lot of nonsense like text and, like what is this? Like all this like code and, just stuff that we don't need. And it's just taking up a ton of, space. We're saying, hey, if you get this, if you take this as input, we want you to respond like this assistant prompt. So see, it's removing all that nonsense and it's just taking the link to the article and it's taking the main content and that's it. It's not gonna do all that nonsense where it's grabbing all those other characters that we just don't need. And then the final user prompt is just mapping the actual data that we're that we're outputting from that Firecrawl module. So it's basically just grabbing the main text from the Firecrawl module. And so when here's what it looks like. I think I just showed this, right? So it'll be like a huge long string with a bunch of nonsense characters, especially toward the bottom, right? Like read more, sign up, related stories. And here's what it looks like after we run it through the preprocessor. It looks like this: start article, and then there's going to be another one right below it, operation 2, is it results, and then we have another one, start article, and at the bottom it'll say end. And so then we've just ran through 2 different operations. Each one is getting the main content or pre-processing the main article for each link in that section. And so then once we've done that, we want to aggregate them back down so that they're into one. And remember that delimiter, right? Each operation has a start and end delimiter. When we're aggregating, that's why it becomes so important. We're basically just mapping the output of this ChatGPT module. where's the new line character? Right here. So I added this new line character because when these are aggregated, um, we want them to be staggered. So it's start article, end article, and then we have the second article right below it, as opposed to like right next to it. I hope that makes sense. It's basically just a way to. This will make a lot more sense if I show it. To ensure that the second or the following article is below rather than right next to it. And basically, that's just going to help this next GPT module have it be effortlessly interpretable. And on that note, due to the fact that I am using that specific delimiter in the preprocessor, I might not need this. It might be a bit redundant, but it's not consuming any operations. And if I haven't, and if I wasn't using that delimiter, this new line might make it easier for the next GPT module to see where the articles start and end. But I'm just, like I said earlier, I'm leaving no room for guessing, and so I'm just using a new line separator to add a new line between the first article and the second. So I hope that makes sense. And this is the section text generator for each respective section. And this is really where the content, the magic happens, so to speak, where the actual article's section text is generated. And I'll run through all the prompts here. So the first message, which is always going to be a system prompt. I don't know if I said this in earlier, but I should have. Always add a system prompt that gives the ChatGPT module something to identify as. So in this case, your helpful and intelligent newsletter writing assistant, because that's what we're doing. We're writing newsletter content. And then the user prompts are basically specifying the task that it's doing, and then subsequent user prompts are for examples. And I'll explain exactly what that means. So, your helpful newsletter writing assistant, your task is to write section text for a newsletter that summarizes major news stories across different industries. The tone should be satirical, punchy, and smart, Tim Dillon energy with journalistic clarity. You'll receive a string of text that includes multiple news articles that are clearly delimited with the string like this. So earlier we specified to add this delimiter, and now it's saying, hey, when you see this, that's how you know it's one story. For each story, do the following. Write a bold, engaging headline that hyperlinks to the article's URL using Markdown ATX link syntax. Markdown format is basically a format that's easily formatted within a Google document. So ChatGPT doesn't know like what should be a headline or what should be bold or what should be like a bullet point. But what it can do is it can be given it can output markdown format, which is basically just text with like hashtags before it, and those hashtags basically format the text, or it tells GPT that even though it's not formatted as a headline or as bullet points, this text is meant to be a headline and so forth. Write 1 to 2 sentences summarizing the key news story in a witty, irreverent tone. So witty and irreverent, basically that's just the combination of tonality that I like, that I personally find engaging, and so that's what I'm using for this newsletter. It's supposed to be educational, but also easy and digestible and fun to read. Format each article summary as a markdown bullet point, starting with the bold hyperlinked headline followed by the summary sentence. So earlier when I showed you the format for each newsletter, remember, it has a headline that's hyperlinked followed by a couple sentences summarizing. And originally I hadn't been using bullets for everything. I was only using the bullet point format like this for news bites. But in this automation, I'm doing all sections like this with the bullet point format. I just think it reads a little better. It's a little more digestible. Use markdown links, headline, and then followed by the URL to hyperlink headlines. So this is telling ChatGPT how to get it formatted the way we want to. Separate each bullet point with a blank line. Tone, dry humor, sharp opinion, and satirical jabs like Tim Dillon, while keeping the summaries tight, readable, and informative. So honestly, I could probably just delete this since I'm already specifying this up here. That's just something I'm honestly just catching in real time. So that last part here is a bit redundant since we already specify that up here, but nonetheless, it seems to work just fine. Next, message 3 is another user prompt. And this, again, this is the very first example or exemplar that we're feeding into GPT. So we're saying, hey, ChatGPT, if this is what you take as input, if this is what you take as input, we want you, and this is where the assistant prompt comes in once again, we want you to output this. And this is the exact bullet. This is Markdown ATX bullet format. So these two asterisks before and after the link, that'll just make it bold. So see how it's bold right here? Bold text, hyperlinked, and then followed by the 1 to 2 sentence summary. So this is just giving an example, like, hey, if this is what you take in, like the cleaned scraped text that we just processed, this is exactly what we want you to output. And doing so allows us to get that format that we specified. And then the final message, user prompt. Again, this is just where you map the variable that you would like to take as input. So we have the aggregated content, and that's just a long string of the different articles, or the 2 articles in this case. And then we're plugging that in at the very bottom in the final user prompt, and that's what will be taken as input for this GPT module right here. And then finally in the path, we have a set variable module. So like I said, we have 3 different sections for the newsletter. And after each section is generated, we need to set a variable for the text for that section. So this will be both links, or the summaries and headlines for both links. So here we go. We have the first one, Supreme Court, soft spot for lawmakers. Then we have the second one, federal court sparks, blah, blah, blah. And then there's again, these are totally random examples. I didn't mean to like pick politically charged ones. They're just like totally random links that I grabbed. So yeah, and to say nothing about any political stuff. That's not what this video is about. But yeah, I guess these are just like what fell under like the economics trend section. So when setting variables, you just name the variable name. So this will be important when we're retrieving the variables and aggregating all the sections together at the end. So we'll get to that. So see, I'm just mapping the output from the module before it, and then it'll just be a string of both bullet points, or not both, but a bullet point summary for each link that we're feeding into that section. So again, if there was 4, there'd be 4 here. If there were 5 links that we fed into the form, there'd be 5 here. All right, so let's go to the next section. Honestly, the next section is the exact same thing. Nothing new here. We're doing all the same stuff. We're iterating through the tech links, so both of those links for the tech trend sections. We have the FireCrawl module that's scraping the content from both links, and then we're feeding both of those news stories scraped content into the preprocessor. The preprocessor is removing all that filler nonsense and the subscribe and terms and conditions text that's on the back end of that code, and then we're aggregating that content, same as before, basically taking both those stories and we're aggregating them into one that we'll be able to bring together. Moving on to the third and final path. So the third and final path is the same up until this point, where we're setting the variable the same as we were in the other 2 sections, and we're getting the 2 bullet points in this case for this section. But what's different in this third path is that we're actually going to grab the variables that we set in the top 2 paths, and we're going to aggregate them with this third one, and that's going to give us basically all the different links in all their respective sections. And we're getting the variables, we're getting the summaries for all the sections all in this one module right here, and that's going to allow us to generate the teaser. So this part where it says in today's edition, that's basically this GPT module for generate teaser is generating the content for that that first introductory part of the newsletter. So I'm saying, hey, you're a helpful, intelligent newsletter or writing assistant. Your task is to take as input content for a newsletter and use it to write a short teaser like a Tim Dillon podcast title. Highlight 1 to 2 of the most engaging or outrageous headlines and make it feel like a compelling reason to keep reading. Keep it under 25 words. And then I'm giving it an example. So the economics edge, I'm giving it the tech trends. So this is basically giving it an aggregated block or string of all 3 sections. And it's saying, hey, ChatGPT, if this is what you take as input, here's what I want you to output as the title. So I just gave it basically an entire newsletter for all 3 sections, and then ChatGPT And then ChatGPT is saying, okay, sure, if that's what I took as input, this is what'll make the title or the teaser. AI stocks explode, robo-dogs rise, and the Secret Service forgets their job again. So it's kind of like funny and satirical in a way, and it makes for an engaging newsletter title. Message 5, the user prompt. And so this is just sticking in all three sections, and I'm adding a space between each section so that there's spacing in the final output rather than just stacked on top of each other. You'll see what I mean in just a second. All right, and then after that, I'm generating the TLDR. So we just generated this, and I'm also generating this. And so I'll show you the prompt I use for this. Um, Sometimes it takes a while to load the all the prompts, especially when you add a lot of context to them. All right, so your helpful and intelligent writing assistant. Your task is to take a simple content for a newsletter and turn each bullet into the shortest and snappiest sentence you can write to summarize the info. Use the tone of Tim Dillon and start each with a relevant emoji. Return as marked on bullets. If you can't tell by now, I'm a huge fan of Tim Dillon. I really like him. Find him very funny. And then another user prompt. So again, saying, hey, ChatGPT, if this is what you take in as the newsletter content, hey, this is what we think you should write as the too long didn't read section. So it's basically just a one sentence summary of each story highlighted within the news story. After that, after the final GPT module, once we've generated all the content for all the sections in the intro and the TLDR section at the end of the newsletter, then we compose a string. Basically just a long string that is basically in Markdown format the entire newsletter. So we have the title. This is this hashtag represents an H1 heading. So like the big bold, big text H1 heading. You know what? Let me just pull up that newsletter again, and I'll show you exactly what that is. So this is H1 heading. This is slightly smaller. This is H2 heading, and then I think I'm using H3 here. And we need to do it in Markdown so that we can ultimately have it formatted in the way we want. So Google Docs doesn't understand Markdown, but it does understand HTML. And so that's why we're using this Markdown to HTML module. We're taking this string that's outputting Markdown and we're turning it into HTML. And so we're just mapping the variable from the composed string. And here is what that HTML looks like. So there's like these different, um, H1, and then we have the paragraph text, and then we have like this basically UL, this wrapped UL. What does that mean? It means unordered list, so like a bullet list, and then list item. That would mean like bullet point one, and strong. So that's telling it to be bold, and then we're giving it the link that it's hyperlinking to, and then of course the subsequent or summary text. And we have the next bullet, list item, and then so on and so forth. And that markdown to HTML module, if we just dumped this string into Google Docs, this is what it would show up as. It would just show up as all like a plain text with the hashtags and like the HTML wrapping. We don't want that. We want it to show up exactly like this, right? Or more or less like this. And so that's why we mark it down to HTML, and Google Docs can interpret that HTML and automatically format it exactly how we want. And so even though the HTML looks like this, when we take the Google Doc and we basically just wrap that HTML in HTML and body wrapping, that tells the Google Doc to format it, format the HTML the way that we want it to be output. And then here for, this is just subcutaneous anthology doc 4, and then I'm taking the date time that I'm creating it at, like for example, right now, whatever the date time is right now, it's formatting it in like month, day, year. So like 6/17, 2005 or whatever. Just formatting it in the date that I want it to read as. And then that outputs, this will give you a web view link, and this is exactly what it looks like. And so it's spaced exactly how I want to. There's space between each section, the hyperlinks, the text. Every section is exactly how I want it to read. And so, yeah, basically that's the entire flow. That's what I set up in order to do that. I know there's a lot there, so hopefully this was helpful. And if you have any questions, let me know.